was my first camera? My first camera was a Canon, a small film camera. It's very small.
What did you first like to take pictures of, and how old were you?
Well, I was about your age, probably about 13 or 14. I used to take pictures in my neighborhood, and we had some train tracks near my house. And I also liked to go out in the wintertime because it was black and white, and there's a lot of contrast between blacks and whites. So I like snow. Snow will make good pictures. The first time I got paid to film or take pictures of something was working for a private detective in Waikiki. Had something to do with a divorce. So I went down and I took pictures. Snapped the button. But the process of getting a picture wasn't like taking out a chip. You'd actually have to develop it. And I would develop the film, and then I would develop the negatives. So I had to have paper, and I had a little dark room in my basement. It was really easy to set up. I just had to make sure that it was dark, but I had my own little dark room to develop.
What was editing like in the 1980s?
Well, that's part of that. Editing was, getting the film, shooting 24 shots or 36 shots right off the bat because you had a roll of film. And then you'd have to go into the dark room and, you'd have to manipulate, edit it. I guess I don't even know if they use the word edit then. Develop. Well, I'm shooting on a Canon right now, and I like Canon better than my Sony on some days because I have more equipment and the lenses are better. But the Sony is mirrorless, which is different than the SLR camera that I have here. It's more portable. They're both full frame. I do like shooting full frame, but I'd have to say Canon for now. I like Leica, but they're just too expensive for street photography. I tell you, the coolest thing that I've ever filmed recently, I've filmed so many things, was when you and I went to Florence. We flew a drone over the Duomo in Florence at nighttime. A lot of people take pictures of the Duomo, but I've never done it at night. And it's just beautiful because it's all lit up and a little bit windy, but it was cool. And I got some really good shots and I was happy with them. Something totally different. Well, all my trips I like to film are interesting. Recently, I went to Russia, and in Russia there was some pretty interesting stuff to see, especially in St. Petersburg and of course Moscow, because it's a place that I've always seen on TV in the 80s, but never actually went there. And then I finally got a chance to see the Seven Sisters and the bigger, Soviet-style architecture. It was pretty cool. I don't see it too often. Recently, I've been filming oral histories for families that are, maybe a little bit older, and they tell their stories. So I do that, and that's fulfilling because a couple of the ones that I've just recently done, they've passed away, and I was able to capture it on, film so that they could, families could watch it later, and, they're very happy for it. So it's kind of satisfying. Plus I get to hear what their whole life stories are about. That's a great question. Who's my favorite filmer? Well, I like, a lot of the, movie guys, but recently, ones that get me inspired because I know I can emulate that. You can't emulate a large Hollywood set, but the guy that films for Anthony Bourdain, his name is Zach Zamboni, and I like that style because he goes into different places like I do in different countries, and he's able to take a small crew and get great results. And his name is Zach Zamboni. You'll see his credits come up at the end of Parts Unknown, and it's very, he's inspiring. So that's the guy I like. He gets some great shots, especially of the food, and he just captures the essence in a very quick way.
Oh yeah, I'm turning the camera off here.
The current state of photography, and of course filmmaking or movie making, or whatever you want to call it, it's a great time because camera equipment has gotten so cheap, and you can produce fantastic images and stories with a tenth of the cost of what it would have cost 15 years ago, 12, 10 years ago, even 8 years ago. The costs have come down so much, and it's able to people to, tell their stories and, tell stories in a beautiful way. So I think the state of photography and videography, it's got a long road ahead of itself. It's good stuff. Not just this country either. Equipment. One of the big equipment failures I've had is audio. Sometimes the audio doesn't come out well, and that can ruin everything, especially in a documentary where you need audio and it's critical. Sometimes you can patch over it and do those things, but maybe an SD card here or there, or maybe I forgot, or a plate for a tripod. But for the most part, I've been pretty lucky. Editing program. It's surely not developing, even though I like going into the dark room and developing things. I start off with Final Cut Pro, and now I'm using Premiere Pro because there's a whole Adobe suite that has to do with getting these, stories out, and I use Premiere Pro. Well, today I shot this particular shot on a 50 millimeter lens. I'm using a auxiliary light, and I've got a nice light coming through the window. I made sure that we did this close to the end of the day, because at the end of the day they call this light the golden hour, and this is when the sun comes down a certain round. So I get this source of light, and I get this source of light, and I have one other reflector here, so that we can get some great light, and great light makes great shots, which tells great stories. Light tells the story.
What was the biggest oopsie you have made while filming?
The biggest oopsie, I would say maybe not turning on the camera or turning it on too late. Sometimes oopsies are shakes, unplanned shakes, or one time I was filming, the microphone was going towards me and I had the camera pointed towards somebody else, so that I was recording more of me and my breath than them. So, and that was just the placement of the microphone, again, back to audio. So that was probably my biggest oopsie, or the scariest oopsie. What's the one piece of advice or story I would tell to somebody that might be getting into this? Don't quit. Just do it. You'd be surprised what you get once you start shooting and editing and putting all on the timeline. Sometimes I come up with my best ideas after it's shot and put on the timeline. I'm like, oh, you know what, I could add this. And it's just, you got to start, even if you get 10% or 20% of the project in the hopper, you don't have to be 100% done. If you can just start, sometimes that 20, 30% of that project comes together, and you're like, oh yeah, I could do this, or I could add this music, and then you're 50% done. And then next thing you know, you've got maybe a different project than you thought before you started.